But our next speaker, of course, QED promises the best speakers from across the spherical globe. This next speaker is someone who is the project director of the Good Thinking Society. He's a writer with a skeptical eye, and he is bringing some insider notes from the flat Earth community. Please welcome to the stage, Michael Marshall.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for coming. This is great. It is true that QED does search the entire spherical globe to find the best speakers, and for this one we looked all the way to the organizer team. So we worked really hard to find me for this one. But yeah, I want to talk to you about an odd investigation I've spent the last, well, quite a few years doing and seeing bits of along the way. So if people don't know much about who I am, this is kind of some of the stuff that I do. So I'm involved in Merseyside Skeptic Society. I co-organize this. I do the Be Reasonable podcast. Have we got any Be Reasonable listeners in? Wow, my entire audience has come to this talk. That's absolutely lovely. Delighted for you. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, I'm the project director of Good Thinking Society. So often when I give talks about the activist work that we're doing to try and stop NHS homeopathy or expose cancer fundraising appeals and various stuff like that. And it's not often that I get to give a talk that's about a different strand of the type of skepticism that I do. And so this talk really sort of stems not from good thinking, but from Be Reasonable, really. Because over the last couple of years, I've spent more and more time talking to people who are from a community of people who don't believe that this is a good reflection of what the world looks like. And it's strange because when I started looking at this in maybe sort of 2012, 2013, I'd do skeptical talks around the country and I'd speak to skeptics in the pub groups, and I'd have a little footnote at the end of my talks, and here's some stories I haven't mentioned in case you're interested. And Flat Earth was on there, and I'd always get people saying, oh, there can't really be people who think the world is flat. That's a joke. No one actually thinks that. And that was 2013. And then 5 years later, I think earlier this year, it was all over the BBC. They had Flat Earth proponents on This Morning with Phil and Fern, and this is suddenly a very well-known, prominent thing. And I've seen it sort of rise over that time. And I think I can explain a little bit of its rise, but a little bit more about its kind of history a little bit. So the modern belief in the flat Earth really did start in 1838 with this chap here, Samuel Robotham. He conducted what was called the Bedford Level experiments, where he tried to see how far he could see across a relatively straight canal, with a theory being that if his friend rowed away from him, eventually if the world was curved, he'd row past the curve and be out of sight. And so because that didn't happen, he then claimed that the world was flat as a result. That was the first real experiment in the modern flat Earth movement. And then in 1870, one of his followers, a guy called John Hampden, made a bet, actually with Alfred Russel Wallace, who, remember, is the silver medalist in the race to evolution theory. He's a guy who got there just after Darwin. But he made a bet with Wallace that he could repeat the Bedford Level experiment and demonstrate that the world was actually flat. And he did repeat that, and he did demonstrate that, but actually subsequently he lost the bet when it turned out what was really going on, and it all kind of got a bit acrimonious. But then in 1881, Robotham, writing under the pseudonym Parallax, published this book, which was very, very influential, Zetetic Astronomy, The Earth is Not a Globe. And this was quite broadly read. He died in 1884, and in his memory, Lady Elizabeth Blount set up the Zetetic Society, the Universal Zetetic Society, which was the precursor to the Flat Earth movement. And this actually had a fair amount of early prominence. They had thousands of members involved in this early on. They distributed newsletters and various other things decrying the round Earth model and saying the flat Earth is absolutely correct. And it really started to take off up until round about the start of the 20th century, when their numbers really started to decline. And arguably that's because we went into space. And people went, oh yeah, it's round, isn't it? I can sort of see that now. Yeah, I get the whole roundness thing going on. And so the numbers started to dwindle, and it kind of fizzled out a little bit. And then in 1956, Samuel Shenton, this guy you can see on the screen here, founded the Flat Earth Society, sort of picking up the work of the Universal Zetetic Society and creating the Flat Earth Society. And then he died in 1971, and the movement made its way over to America with Charles Johnson, who called it the Flat Earth Research Society of America. And interestingly there, and this is kind of key to what I'm going to get to about the modern Flat Earth movement, Johnson was an evangelical Christian who ran an evangelical church, and he basically combined the two. He saw Flat Earth as proof that the biblical version of the world is correct, and therefore the proofs of the Flat Earth are proofs themselves of God. And this became a very strong running theme in the Flat Earth movement at the time. But then tragedy struck for Johnson in 1997 when his house burned down, and the records, the books that actually contained the names and addresses of the 3,000 members of the Flat Earth Society burned in the fire, and almost the entire society was destroyed in that house fire. They didn't have any backups. This was still on paper. They lost almost their entire membership, and it went quiet for quite a while. And then in 2004, the modern Flat Earth Society reformed, started up. It was started by Daniel Shenton, who unbelievably is not related to Samuel Shenton. I've only ever heard of 2 Shentons in history. They're both Flat Earthers and they're not related, which I think is astonishing. And so in 2004, they reformed this mostly as an online forum where people would have these debates. And I actually interviewed the vice president of the Flat Earth Society, a guy called Michael Wilmore, back in 2013 in January on Be Reasonable. And what I found from talking to Michael Wilmore was there were some really interesting schisms in the flat Earth world, which I think are great. So you have the entire Flat Earth Society at the time, which was this online web forum, which mostly consisted of people arguing over details, consisted of 2 halves of people. There were those who absolutely believed that the world was flat, and there were those who didn't believe the world was flat, but just enjoyed the intellectual pursuit of arguing from a position they know to be false. You know, how far can I go in trolling this from just exploring bizarre ways of interpreting the physics to carry on backing up an idea that I know is false, but I'm just going to have fun with this. The problem is this half of people were so good, they really convinced this half of people. And I think they actually started to gather more momentum for the group at that point. So that's one of the interesting schisms. The other interesting schism is one of my favorite things of anything I've ever discovered in skepticism. You have the half of the Flat Earth Society who believe that the world is a circular disk. And at the center of that disk, you've got the Arctic Circle, and you've got the rest of the country splayed out as if you took a globe and just splayed it out into a circle and sort of stretched it around the edges. And the Antarctic Circle is a ring of ice around the edge. And that's a disk world that half of this society believe in. The other half of society see the continents laid out in the same way, but they don't believe there's a wall of ice. They don't believe it's even a disk. They think the world is an infinite plane in all directions that bisects reality. I favor that half of the schism. I really love that half of the schism. I love that idea that there's an infinite plane in all directions that bisects reality. So there is reality above, reality below, but no matter how far you go in any direction, you will never be able to get from above to below. You just go on forever. And I really like that. Both of these suffer from the same kind of problem, which is that they would collapse, and if there was gravity as we know it, they would collapse back into a ball effectively. Flat Earthers tend to discount this by one way that Flat Earth Society discount gravity is to say, well, gravity is a accelerant force. You will accelerate towards the ground at like 9.8 meters per second squared. So if I dropped this glass of water, which I'm not going to because I'm also a co-organizer and I don't have to pick this up again, but if I drop this from here, it would accelerate towards the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared. They say, but that is indistinguishable from a world in which you let go of the glass and the world comes up to meet it at 9.8 meters per second squared. This infinite plane in all directions that's bisecting reality is also traveling upwards at an accelerating speed of 9.8 meters per second squared, and always has been since the dawn of time. And they say this, therefore, would look identical. Now, you are probably a pretty savvy audience. You can probably see what the flaw is with something accelerating constantly since the beginning of time. Who wants to shout out what the problem here is? Light speed, absolutely. You can't go faster than the speed of light. So if you're accelerating for sufficiently long, you're going to overtake the speed of light. Aha, says the Flat Earth Society. Look at the theory of relativity. It says you can't go faster than light speed. As you approach light speed, time slows down, and that's what's happening. So we keep getting faster, but time is slowing down, and it all feels the same to us, and everything works back out again. So the maths of it, they were really sort of working quite hard on. So it was fascinating, and there were loads of these kind of conversations going on. I found it a really interesting sort of space to explore, and I had a good old conversation with Michael Wilmore in 2013. But this was still incredibly niche, and almost nobody really believed that anybody actually took this stuff as true. So here's a couple of models of what the flat Earth might look like. This is the common flat Earth map, the circular disk, Arctic Circle in the center. You then have, this is Michael Wilmore's own version of the map, which is a slight adjustment that allows apparently for better shipping routes, which he'd researched. And this is one proposed version of the infinite plane, which you can see in the center, there's the Earth. You've got ice in all directions. But if the Earth is in effectively a lot of water in a hole in the ice and all the land's inside, then they argue what's to stop there being other holes in the ice filled with water and filled with land. Maybe that's where aliens come from. Tick, got that ticked off too. So immediately what we see here is this isn't one coherent vision of what the world looks like, but conflicting visions. And this is a theme that comes up more and more the more you research flat Earth. Then I think something happened that kicked off the resurgence we've seen in the last 5 years. Eric Dubay published this video and YouTube, it was a YouTube video and an ebook called 200 Proofs That the Earth is Not a Spinning Globe. And this is one of the most influential things that happened. Loads of people who now talk about being flat earthers cite this book or the arguments in it as the reason why. And actually a lot of the arguments are taken from the original one written by Samuel Robotham in 1888. So there's nothing new under the flat sun, I guess, really. But the arguments in this book are relatively straightforward. So they say the horizon always looks flat. I can't see a curve. It always looks flat. No matter how high I go up, it always seems to be at eye level because of the flatness kind of thing. That shows that it's always flat. They say water always finds its level. You don't see water bending. You don't see it curving. You don't see it sticking to a ball. If you filled a bathtub with water and agitate it enough, it would go level. So all you need to do is look at lakes, and lakes should be flat, and therefore the world is flat. Water always finds its level. They also argue that in this book, water always runs downhill, which can't work in a ball Earth because some of the rivers on the southern hemisphere will be running uphill towards the equator. This is one of the most influential books. It genuinely is influential to a lot of people's beliefs in the flat Earth. Number 7, they say architects have never had to factor the curvature of the Earth into their buildings, and therefore the world is flat. And number 9 is genuinely this engineer in 1893 wrote that he didn't think the Earth was round, and therefore it isn't. It's little more than an argument from a very small amount of authority. This is a nice one. They say that pilots, if the world was round and a pilot is flying over the Earth, flying over around Earth, they'd have to keep course correcting their nose downwards, otherwise they'd fly off into space. And if you talk to a pilot, they never see themselves doing this as they're flying, and therefore the world can't be round. It has to be flat. And I'll come back to some of these arguments later on. They also argue with the way that we see the universe. So they say if there were so many stars in the sky, billions and billions, as Carl Sagan would say, that those stars are all points of light, and yet the night sky is black, so therefore there can't be those stars, therefore the universe is wrong, NASA's lying to you because the world is flat. We see a couple of things that are very similar. So they say cannonballs. If you fire a cannonball straight and the world is really rotating at 1,000 miles an hour, that cannonball should shoot off in that direction as it leaves a connection to the ground and the ground spins beneath it. So effectively, the cannonball would go straight where the ground is spinning, and what we would see is you shoot a cannonball and it goes and veers off. We don't see that happening, therefore they believe that the world is flat. And similar helicopters, they say, if you were able to fly a helicopter and the world was spinning, all you need to do is hover up, let the world spin beneath you, and then come back down again. These are genuinely in the 200 Proofs of Eric Dubay. So this kind of stuff was very, very influential to a lot of people, and a lot of people cite this as, even as you talk to flat earthers, this stuff comes back up. And in fact, people have tried to take experiments onto planes. They think planes are very significant. This is one YouTube video where they took a spirit level onto the plane to show that the spirit level always stays flat at altitude. You don't see the spirit level changing as we curve around the surface of the Earth. And obviously what's happening is they don't understand what a spirit level is measuring, because a spirit level is essentially measuring which direction the center of the Earth is at. It's a measure of gravity. The gravity is pulling the bubble in the water equally on both sides when it's level, and therefore it remains level. So they just don't understand the apparatus that they're using there. But they did have this time lapse of an entire flight. You can see the flight from taking off to landing, and you see the spirit level the same. As they see, spirit level doesn't change, the world is flat. Well, actually, this experiment didn't disprove either model. This would work exactly the same in both models. So Eric Dubay was one of the fathers, one of the touch points of the recent resurgence in flat Earth belief. I think the other one was Mark Sargent. When you talk to flat earthers, his name comes up an awful lot. He's a conspiracy theorist. He believes that JFK was assassinated, that the moon landing was faked, obviously, that civilizations used to live on Mars. He used to believe that. And as it happens, I interviewed Mark Sargent too. I think it was in I think it was in 2017 I interviewed him, but he said he came to the flat Earth belief in 2014 after 9 months of rigorous research. He said, I came to it thinking this is obviously nonsense, but after 9 months I tried my hardest to debunk it, and because I personally could not debunk the flat Earth belief, all of science is wrong, because my 9 months wasn't quite good enough to debunk this, and that's how he became a flat earther. So yeah, and he produced a series of videos called Flat Earth Clues in 2015, which loads of people cite, even the big players in the big people in the Flat Earth movement. So Mark Sargent's view of the world isn't one of the two that I mentioned. It's even a third version of the world. He's a proponent of the dome theory. So the fact that yes, we're circular, but we're actually enclosed in a dome. He cites the Truman Show as evidence of this. He says, you know, like in the Truman Show where Jim Carrey sails to the side of the world and hits the side, that's exactly what we could do if we were able to go far enough. In fact, the Truman Show, he says, was put out by Hollywood to throw us off the scent. So if anyone said, we live in a dome, people could retort, well, I think you just watched The Truman Show a few too many times, mate. I think you should really get with the program. So all this stuff is anything that they might look like they got their theory from is actually just controlled opposition put out by them who is hiding the truth of the flat Earth from us. But he said the reason we know this is true is in the 1960s, the USA, the Soviets, were looking to sort of more and more advances in the space race, the new sort of frontier of the Cold War. And they said that as they were looking to space, they were also looking to Antarctica to try and find more and more land to use as strategic importance. And he says that when they got there, both the USA and the Soviets found the edge of the wall in Antarctica. And at that point, they agreed never to tell anyone. And the rest of the Cold War onwards, they were working together. And the Cold War was a fake war put out to sort of throw people off the scent. They pretended to be enemies, but actually they were working together to hide the truth of the edge wall and the dome Earth. He said one of the proofs of this is if you look at Wernher von Braun, one of the scientists that Project Paperclip rescued smuggled scientists out of the Nazi government in order to run the US's space program. Wernher von Braun, when he died, he was one of the rocket scientists who was the father, the pioneer of rocket science, and therefore kind of in many ways the father of space exploration that subsequently followed based on the same technology. But he knew the world was flat. He knew his entire work was a fraud, and we know that because his gravestone cites Psalms 19:1. This is his way of apologizing for perpetrating a huge hoax on the entire world forever. This is his deathbed or post-deathbed confessional. Because Psalms 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." And the firmament is a biblical term for the roof of the world, the roof of the earth in the Genesis version of reality. So Mark Sargent and people who follow his belief argue, well, why would Wernher von Braun, the father of rocket scientists, the guy who put people out there into space, his technology put people out there, why would he on his gravestone have a reference to the firmament? This is his way of saying there's a roof, there's a dome. This is his way of apologizing for his life's work. That's one explanation. The other explanation is in this kind of heavens declaring the glory of God bit, and him being the guy who saw himself as reaching into the heavens and sort of mastering the heavens, and it's kind of the self-aggrandizement of the glory of researching and exploring and getting into the heavens. So that's the perhaps more logical reason for why he's used that quote. But no, the fact that he says firmament is proof that he is apologizing from beyond the grave for this huge hoax that he's perpetrated. So because we're in a dome, we start to have questions about the rest of the universe. So the stars and the planets, obviously they don't exist. They're just painted on the dome, or they're projected on the dome from outside. The sun and moon, they do exist, but they're not as far away as we think. They're just light sources from nearby us that gets moved around. And if you ask him, who do they get moved around by? He says, well, that's the thing. You can't ask that question. Because we can't even accept, we're not allowed to even think of the fact that we're in a dome. They do so much to throw us off the dome theory that we can't even have access to these questions. So the second we accept the dome, we can start asking the real questions, like, who is it out there that's moving the sun around, and why are they doing it the way that they're doing it? I had a really interesting conversation with Mark. My favorite bit about it, he said he was a conspiracy theorist of all these different stripes. Every theory he came across, he was interested in. And I asked him, try and get a sense of his take on what the value of evidence is and what the level of evidence is. I asked him, did you ever believe in a conspiracy theory that you now believe to be nonsense because you think it can't possibly be true? Is there anything you've ever stepped back from? And he said, yes, there is one. Because he said, all the rest of them that I believe all make sense now. I used to wonder, he said, why did they kill JFK? Well, the reason they killed JFK is because he knew we didn't go to the moon. Why didn't we go to the moon? Because we can't get to the moon, there's a dome. All the conspiracy theories line up like flat Earth is the Rosetta Stone of conspiracy theories. It all made sense to him, apart from one. He said, I no longer believe in the face on Mars or the civilization on Mars. I don't think that's a thing, and I'd love to debate someone about that because I think that's absolute nonsense. And I said, yeah, that's because you don't believe in Mars anymore. That's not getting more reasonable. You just now don't even believe that Mars exists. That doesn't seem like it's quite what I was asking with the question. But Mark Sargent is hugely influential in the Flat Earth movement. So this is Mark Sargent's version of the world, which you can now add to our models of the Flat Earth. So we have the enclosed Earth to go with the infinite and the standard models. So what struck me as quite odd is as I was kind of looking at this over a period of time, it started to get more and more prominence, right to the fact that there started to be local flat Earth groups appear. And there was one in Chester, quite near where I live in Liverpool. So I thought, well, I'm going to go along to there. And I'm not going to go along to berate them or to mock them or to feel superior to them, but I'm going to go along just to talk to them because I'm genuinely really interested in why people in this day and age believe the world is flat. I want to know what got them there. I want to know what they think is evidence. I want to know what they think about the evidence that disproves it. I want to have that conversation. So I went along to my local flat earth group in Chester. There was about 8 people there. It was really fun, actually. It was a really fun evening. But what we learned from them was you cannot trust anything, any experiment you haven't done yourself. Don't trust a demonstration you can't do. It's all about your own personal proof. It's not about what anyone else can do. You have to be able to replicate it yourself, or it's worthless, because you can't trust anyone. Which is kind of convenient, because the types of experiments you'd need to do to demonstrate some of the stuff that's happening at NASA and some of the space exploration stuff requires a bit more than you can cram into your kitchen. So it needs a little bit more equipment and a little bit more expertise. But if you are throwing out everything you can't do, it's very easy to then throw out everything in astrophysics. So you can't trust anything you've not discovered yourself. You can't trust photographs. Apparently all photographs, not reliable evidence. Show me a photograph, I'll tell you it's faked. Picture of the Earth, photoshopped. Composite image, all faked. Why does this look different to that? This is all just a fake. So there's no photo that's convincing evidence. You can never trust them. But you can trust YouTube. You should always trust YouTube. Here's a YouTube video that tells you exactly why the world is flat. Have you watched this 3-hour YouTube video where they tell you the world is flat? You should watch it. It's great. No recognition of the cognitive dissonance mid-conversation of show me a photo, I'll tell you it's nonsense, but this video proves that I'm right. This video of an experiment someone did that I've not done, but they did. Here's a video of their experiment. It must be true. It's a study in many ways in motivated reasoning. You know, the standard of evidence for the claim you're making is much higher than the standard of evidence for the claim that I already believe in and I'm making. I'll accept a much lower standard of evidence. In fact, one of the guys at the conference, at the local flat earth group, showed me a picture to try and disprove the world was round. And I said to him, why are you showing me a picture when you don't think photos are proof? What you're literally saying there is, I expect you to accept a lower standard of evidence than I'm willing to accept myself. I think it's an interesting way of studying the way that people justify their own beliefs. Because I think we've all been guilty of that as well, I guarantee it. How many times has someone challenged you on a point and you've gone off Googling for the first link you can find that proves you're right, rather than looking for a fair and balanced view of the evidence and both sides? I've done it myself. It's a natural compulsion. But in the flat earth world, it's kind of a compulsion writ large that we can all see. You can't really miss it. So we found out that gravity doesn't exist. They didn't believe in the accelerating up theory. They believed that what's actually happening is density. The reason you're sticking to the ground is because you're denser than the air. What they're missing is density relies on gravity. The reason it goes down with density is because there's gravity pulling it down, but there is only density. We also found that, again, water always finds its level and water never ever bends. This was repeated several times across the night. Water always finds its level. You can never see water bending, especially not due to gravity. I must admit, the night went on a little while, and I got to a point in the conversation where I did say to them, if you want to see water bending under the force of gravity, follow me to the bathroom, and I'll demonstrate it very clearly. And it wasn't my best argument, but I was very happy with it for a moment. It amused me for a moment, at least. Yeah. So there are local flat earth groups, and if you're like me and you like investigating odd beliefs and trying to understand what it means about the nature of belief, check one out. They're really, really fascinating. I absolutely love going along, which is why when I heard that there was a flat earth convention in the UK's first ever flat earth convention, I absolutely had to go to that. Why would I not go to a weekend of people who believe the world is flat to spend essentially like a QED, but for people with a bad idea, people with an incorrect idea. It was a lovely, lovely weekend. It was in Jury's Inn in April this year. There were 160 people there. There were speakers from all over the, well, whatever they would call it, all over the disc, I'm not sure. There was a lovely moment. I mean, I'm going to talk about a few of the speakers, but one of my favorite moments there was that they mentioned there was a speaker who'd flown in from Argentina, and they mentioned that he'd actually arrived a day earlier than everyone else was expecting. And I did think to myself, is this the kind of thing that happens when your worldview doesn't include the international date line? When you haven't got into explanation for that. I don't know if that was it, but I did just think that at the time. What was interesting was it was organized by a guy called Gary, who was a flat earther since 2015, which was surprising to me because I thought, you're organizing a conference, and I've been researching flat earth kind of longer than you. It's still a relatively modern thing, and I think most of the speakers there came to flat earth in the last couple of years. And so here they are on Phil and Fern on This Morning, saying about the men who believe the earth is flat, and those were all, 3 of those were speakers from the conference there. So I want to tell you about one of the speakers, because there's a couple in there, but I think a couple of them really do shed a little bit of light on what's going on, in my opinion, with flat earth belief. So there's Dave Murphy, Dave Murphy's an interesting guy. He was a former volunteer fireman who was in New Jersey on September 11th. He didn't go in to the actual ground zero, but he did see it happening. He did know people who lost that. And he described it as being a traumatic event, which is is understandable. And he's been a 9/11 truther as a result of that. So he was already in conspiracy theory as a 9/11 truther. But he said in 2005, he had what he claims to be a midlife crisis that led to him living, as he says, off the grid. So I said, I now live completely off the grid after this midlife crisis that led to me being a 9/11 truther and all this other stuff. But as well as being 9/11 truther, he's a believer in all sorts of other things too. And one of those things is that he recommends you drink your own urine for your own health. And he said he's been washing in his own urine since May 2011, which we found out just after someone shook his hand. And I feel that's the kind of thing you say to someone before you shake the hand rather than afterwards, but we found out just after. And in fact, when he comes to talk about drinking your own urine, he has all manner of things that he says it's good for. So urine reverses aging, is helpful with AIDS, with cancer, with smallpox, and in fact, with all of these conditions, every one of these conditions he says can be helped by drinking your own urine. Now, this I think is interesting because I went to a flat Earth convention expecting to hear people who believe the world is flat, but I didn't expect them to also be people who are proponents of alternative medicine, especially extreme stuff like being able to cure cancer with urine therapy. So I think the fact that these are bedfellows is an interesting aspect to this and perhaps indicative. So Dave made a few arguments in his presentation. He came to the Flat Earth in 2016 after seeing the videos by, I believe it was Mark Sargent and Eric Dubay, so those were the sort of the fathers of that movement and getting more and more people in. But once he'd seen these videos, he ended up actually for an hour on Macedonian television explaining to the presenter why the world is flat. And lots of other speakers and attendees at the conference saw this video, and this is how they learned about Flat Earth as a theory and how they came to believe that the world was flat. So I think the power of YouTube is very much driving this. These sort of algorithms that recommend videos is sort of pushing people to see the next video, and more YouTube content is saying that the world is flat and putting this in front of people. Most of the points he made were from the 200 Proofs by Eric Dubay. And yeah, he was an entry point for lots of people. But his video got so many hits that it was actually sort of responded to by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist from America. And so Tyson here is on Star Talk, and he talked about one particular demonstration that is a useful way of pointing out how we know the world is round and not flat. So, for example, they say if Eratosthenes, who was one of the ancient figures, had a well, and at midday, the sun, directly above the well, you could see at the very bottom of the well. But a well some distance away, you couldn't see the bottom of it. And the only explanation for this is either that the sun is very near, and the world is flat, or that the sun is very, very far away and the world is curved. That's the only explanation for the pattern of shadows that you'd get. But either way, either one of those explanations is fine when you have two well shafts. But if you had a third well shaft, you resolve the issue because it wouldn't work in a flat world. It only works in a faraway sun and a round Earth, and not with the close sun and the flat Earth. And this is something that Tyson says in his video response to some of the claims that Dave Murphy was making. And Dave Murphy at the Flat Earth conference debunked Tyson's video. And I think the way he did that was very, very interesting. And again, indicative of some of the rhetorical strategies behind the Flat Earth movement, I think. So what he did was say, this is a still from the video. And he said, well, first of all, if you listen very, very carefully, Neil deGrasse Tyson said Eratosthenes didn't have three wells. You need a third well to add it, but Eratosthenes didn't have a third well. We added that for the experiment. He said, well, there you go then. They're proving that they're lying. They're saying he needed three wells. He didn't have three wells. Case closed. It's a lie. Now, arguably, you could say there have been other wells since then. It doesn't need to be one guy with three wells to get to the bottom of this. This is not the best argument to dismiss this theory. But there's an even more significant one, I think. What he did, this is what Dave did on his video. He took the first well and drew a line from it, and then drew a line from the second well to where they intersect. He said, because this video, this image that they used in the Star Talk video didn't make sense, he said. So once you have these two lines intersecting, he said, I took this mysterious third well that they added, and I extended that one, and what we found was it didn't line up. So this video is proof that they're lying, is proof that they're faking it. This is fake, we can just dismiss it. Now, arguably, a better arguing strategy to this would be to say, this is an inaccurate depiction for a short YouTube video put out by Star Talk, and if we want to dismiss this, we can say this is not very accurate, we'll draw our own accurate version of it, and then see if we can dismiss that. We can't just say this cartoon isn't perfect, and therefore their entire argument is flawed. You have to argue against the best form of the argument, and not the worst form of the argument, and that's something that I think tends to come up a lot when we argue with people even. So that was one of the believers. One of the other speakers there at the Flat Earth Convention was a guy called Darren Nesbitt. Again, he was a conspiracy theorist. He was into 9/11 truth. He was into the Illuminati. He sings songs that you can see on YouTube about how the world is being controlled by the Illuminati forces and how the Queen's involved in it and various things like that. He was a truther about the Boston Marathon bombing. He thought that was an inside job by the government. And he said, in 2014, I stumbled across the Flat Earth arguments. In 2015, I came out as a Flat Earther. And they use that terminology, came out, because that's how it feels to them. Such a revelation, a life-changing thing. This is the point after which my life is never going to be the same again. And I interviewed him actually just last month on Be Reasonable. We sort of dove into his arguments a bit more. And if you want to know more of them, you can check him out. But what was interesting was, in his talk, he shared a list of questions that flat earthers should ask themselves, so the audience asked themselves. And the questions were things like, do you think that people's lives would be improved if they accepted the truth of the flat earth? Do you find it harder and harder to socialize with people who don't believe that the world is flat? Do you find like most of your world is built around now your flat earth belief and the people who believe it? And loads of people in the audience were like nodding to each other and murmurs of assent and chuckles and things as they recognize themselves in this list. And then he revealed that the list of questions was a checklist for signs that you're in a cult. So this is the questions you ask yourself if you're in a cult to find if you are or not. He says, so you should really think about that. And this is interesting, I think, a flat earther saying to a flat earth believing audience, question yourself as to whether you're in a cult or not. And in fact, what he said was, you should always be your own authority and do your own evidence-based skeptical research. Don't just accept what people put in front of you. You have to do your own evidence-based skeptical research. And I genuinely think Darren is genuinely trying to do that. I think he's actually genuinely trying to do that. For example, he showed this, which is the model of the circular Earth as a disk with the Arctic Circle in the middle. And he said there are loads of reasons this absolutely cannot be true. Anybody putting this model forward as a version of the Earth is absolutely wrong for lots of reasons. For example, we've never observed the ice wall around the edge. We would have done by now. There's been enough flights. There's enough people with private planes and drones and things like that. We would have observed it. You can continuously travel in all directions and never hit a barrier. You never hit a point where you have to stop and turn back. So this suggests that there isn't a flat world. Also, this is an important one, but the travel in what we would call the south, which would be around here, he said on this model, this would be like hugely longer than travel in the north, which is just up here. But that isn't true in the way that the world actually works. So we need an accurate version of the world has to have north and south as the same distance to circumnavigate. So this has to be false, he says. And similar, the equator, the bit through the middle, should be the longest journey because that's what we know from real-world observations from people traveling. But on this model, the equator would be halfway between the Arctic Circle and Antarctica, so there's no way that would be the longest. The longest is clearly Antarctica. So he says this whole model is absolutely wrong, and therefore it is controlled opposition put out to throw you off. This is counterintelligence put out by the powers that be, to make people think, well, I've seen some pretty persuasive arguments for the flat Earth, but this model, oh, it can't work, therefore the world must be round. She said, you've got to look beyond that. I'll take you very quickly through his version of the world, because I've got a few other things I want to show you. To look beyond it, he said we have to start off with pyramids, because pyramids are more aligned to true north than anything else, which isn't true, but it's repeated a lot on the internet. And so if you are motivated to find that as true, you'll find it as true. He started looking at the geometry of the pyramid and started seeing, apparently by using common sense, he decided the whole pyramid was built for geometry to represent pi and phi. Because it's representing pi, we should now start looking to see if there are any circles we can draw. So start drawing circles on this diagram, this cross-section of a pyramid. And he said, after a few attempts and some trial and error, I found some places I could draw circles, and he drew these circles here. And then he said, because there are all these circles here, this makes sense because the Bible in the book of Job tells us that the earth is on pillars. These must be the pillars. There must be 7 pillars because the Bible says that God likes the number 7. Be your own authority, do your own evidence-based skeptical research, but the book of Job says the earth is on pillars, and this is that. And then he showed a video of what this pillared version of the world would look like that allows for the same length of travel around the north and south, but the longest travel across the equator. So there's the 7 pillars that from his video rising up. If we show a model of the world that has a long equator, but north and south the same distance to travel, we have to come to the conclusion that the earth is this diamond-shaped here. And this is what Darren shared. But there is a problem with this diamond shape as a version of the Earth, because you can very clearly travel along these 2 lines here. You can travel from left to right. You'd fall off the Earth. You'd fall off the side on a diamond-shaped Earth. But he says, it's not a diamond shape in a conventional sense, because the yellow line to this yellow line is actually a 4-dimensional space-time warp. So what happens is you travel off to the left, and you reappear on the right automatically, which some people labeled the Pac-Man version of the world. You just carry on wacka, wacka, wacka the entire way around. Whereas I saw that and I thought, okay, you're kind of onto something a little bit here, but instead of having a 4-dimensional warp, what if you sort of took that yellow bit and attached it to the other bit? and took that, and you sort of end up in a very rudimentary kind of 8-bit version of a circle. And how about we just take more and more measurements across each longitudinal, latitudinal area, and then the more we'll see that, the more measure we take, the more we'll get to a fully globular Earth. But I think there's a level of motivated reason, I think, that's preventing that last step of connecting those two bits up. So here's another version of the Earth. I'm going to take you through one more, and this one was my favorite model of the Earth, but I do not have time to talk about it in detail, largely because it took the guy who was explaining it 3 hours to tell us the entire intricacies of his model. There was a chap called Martin Kenny, who seemed like a very, very nice guy, but he said he was a conspiracy theorist, a moon landing denier. He spoke for 3 hours on the Saturday night. And to get to his model of the world, he said, I studied the creation myths of 20 different cultures to try and say that not one of these is going to get it right, but some of them get it a bit right. So if I take all the bit rights from all 20, I can sort of put it together and see what is an accurate version of reality. He said things are born from eggs. We've seen this. Things get born out of eggs. So it makes sense that the universe must be born out of an egg because we see things born out of eggs. Lots of ancient cultures talk about things being born out of eggs. Why would an ancient culture talk about things being born out of eggs if they didn't think the universe was born out of an egg, if they didn't have proof that the universe was born out of an egg? It's not just because they have eggs and things get born out of them and we can see how that works. No, it must be because they're tapping into an ancient wisdom about the nature of reality. And so we have this cosmic egg model, this is one version of the cosmic egg model here, which shows different layers of dome. So there is a dome above the egg, there's a dome below the egg as well, and these different colored lights are different layers of dome. And this is the full version. This is the sort of 5-foot-tall model, which was a beautiful thing to behold. As Martin is giving this 3-hour talk, this is under a big white drape for the majority of the talk, and I'm thinking, I really want to see what's under that drape. Oh God, you got to pull that drape back, man. So it was great when it was revealed. We found the Earth is actually circular; it's disc-shaped, but it's not just one ring of ice. There are another ring of ice after that, and another one beyond that, and there's different lands in all those different rings of ice, and it kind of goes on further and further out. We have multiple layers. The layers further out are older, different layers get pushed out. In fact, they say each layer gets created at the North Pole and then pushed out, and the next layer gets pushed out from that. So when the next layer gets created at the North Pole and gets pushed out, we're going to get pushed further apart and further, and we'll be the next layer out. We won't be in this nearest layer. Each layer has its own solar system, which is what each of those concentric domes were. So, for example, our solar system is the sun and moon, but the next layer out, their solar system is Mercury and Venus, which you can see here. This is our version of it here. And that's not meant to be there, by the way. That's Mercury. But he was talking for so long that the lights on the model caused the superglue to lose its stickiness, and Mercury plummeted into one of the oceans midway through, which was a lovely little moment of light comedy for the talk. Each layer has its own race of people, so different races of people, as he was saying it. And he said the next layer that are currently there in the North Pole and about to be pushed out, the race of people who live at the North Pole right now are the Aryan race. So that was an interesting direction for that talk to take. It was 3 hours. I haven't got time to talk about it more than that. But what it does say is, what we're seeing here is that when we talk about flat Earth belief, we're not talking about the belief in a flat Earth. We're talking about beliefs in flat Earths. None of these seem to resemble each other. But quite interestingly, there was almost no disagreement amongst the speakers or the attendees, as each different model is shown. It's like, yes, you agree with us that the world isn't round, therefore, whatever you want to show us, yes, that's correct. There's a level of tribalism there, or rejection. If you reject the mainstream, you're on our side, even if you fundamentally disagree. Your model of the world is fundamentally different to ours. But how do you know these aren't true? I'm going to take you very quickly through just some of the points. I haven't got time to go into a huge amount of detail because people spend hours, 4 hours at a time on YouTube on this. So the curve argument comes up all the time. I can't see a curve, where's the curve? And Eric Debay's 200 Proofs list it at number 62, this diagram here. This diagram is actually taken from Samuel Rowbotham's 1888 book. So this is going right back to the Bedford level experiment. And this is a version of the Bedford level experiment. So you see, Rowbotham is meant to be man A, and his friend is man B, and they have, his man B has sailed, he's rowed away for about sort of 5-6 miles, and in a curved version of the Earth like this, you'd see you wouldn't be able to see each other, but actually 6 miles apart, they could still see each other, and this proves that they must be on a flat Earth because they should not be able to see each other at that distance. Now, I saw this diagram and I thought, okay, if we're looking at diagrams and how accurate they are, if that's what we do, this diagram, this circuit diagram, looks a bit off to me. So let's have a quick look at this diagram. If I extend this circle out, it looks like this. So the version of the world where these two guys are this far apart, that's what the rest of the world looks like. We can do some very basic, really rough back of the paper geometry on this. So if we find the center point of this circle, we can then say, actually, if we draw a line from the edge of the diameter and the circumference up to point B and the same to point A and then back down the center, we sort of get this, okay? So we've got 3 triangles roughly going on there. And if these are roughly 3 equal triangles, they look roughly equal. We don't have to be exact. We're just trying to get a rule of thumb here. If these are roughly equal, then we know that those 3 triangles are 60 degrees, which means we know that the distance from man A to man B is 1/6 of the surface of the Earth, just through some basic geometry there. Well, let's work that out. 24,901 miles, we can say about 25,000. The interior angle is about 60 degrees, so we can say about 1/6. 1/6 of 25,000, these men are 4,150 miles apart for this diagram to be accurate. This is not a very good representation of this experiment. Also, if they were 4,150 miles apart, they'd also be fucking massive. Look how tall those guys are on the surface. You see them a mile away, you definitely see them. So, okay, but what we don't do is we don't argue against inaccurate diagrams. We make a better diagram and argue against that. So let's see if we can find out what those men would actually look like on a version of the Earth where they were 6 miles apart and see what that would actually look like. So first of all, 6 miles apart on an Earth that has a circumference of 25,000 miles, so 25,000 miles divided by 6, we find that they are roughly 4,166th apart. Roughly a 4,000th of the distance of the Earth apart. That's roughly how far those guys are apart. We can therefore figure out what that interior angle must be to figure that out. So we can see that the 360 degrees divided by 4,000 is about 0.09, so it's not 60 degrees, but 0.09 degrees. I'm now going to draw a point on the edge of that circle that shows what those 2 guys would be apart if they're actually going by the geometry of the rough geometry just here. If you look really carefully, you might miss it. There it is. You can't really see it because it's quite small, it turns out, so I'll have to sort of zoom in a little bit. Actually, my point was as small as I could make it in PowerPoint, but it's still 30 miles, which is 5 times bigger than we need. So let's zoom right in. Here it is. There's that point that is 30 miles across, which is 5 times bigger than we need. It's still not a great version of the diagram, so we'll zoom in even further to get a good handle on this. So zooming even further to that point that's 30 miles across, we can now start to draw on man B and man A. This is that's the width of 30 miles of circumference. We need 1/5 of that, but the first man A, would be there. The second man B, would be there. And that would be 6 miles on the curvature of the Earth if we're doing the diagram accurately. And the weird thing is when you do this diagram accurately using the circles I've just shown you, but zooming in far enough, it looks flat. It turns out scale is one of the reasons why we can't see the curve. It actually just looks flat. And the reason they could actually see each other from 6 miles away was because of just refraction light. And it's interesting, the number of the 200 proofs, the number of proofs that come up, the number of points that flat earthers make that demonstrate that the world has to be flat, how many of them are based on the point that you could see this thing from this distance away when the conditions were right. Or they'll say on a clear day. And when they mean on a clear day, they mean when the weather conditions allow for refraction of light, because that explains a huge amount of this. They just haven't got a good explanation or a good grip on refraction of light or the scale of what we're talking about here. We also had this whole thing about water. Water can't bend. Water can't stick to a circle. I actually had an interesting conversation with this at the Chester Flat Earth group, actually, because I managed on the spot to sort of talk a guy through this. So here's a guy actually from the Flat Earth Convention demonstrating that water can't stick to a round object by pouring a glass of water over his head and showing that the water runs off. This is his way. He said, I can prove to you the world is flat with this glass of water, and he poured it over his head. I think that's not a particularly good proof. But what they say is, I started talking to the guy at the Flat Earth Convention. I said, okay, you don't believe that water can stick to a round surface. Could it stick to a square surface? Yes, the top, but not the sides, he says. Okay, let's leave aside water for a second. Let's go for iron filings. If you pour iron filings on a cube, what would they do? And he said, well, they'll stick on top, but they'll roll down the side. I said, great. What if there's a magnet in the center of the cube? He said, well, they'll stick on top and they'll stick to the side. I said, okay. What about not a cube, but a pyramid? So there's no flat bit on top, but it can stick to the sides. So yeah, the iron filings will stick to the sides all the way around because there's a magnet in the middle. It's like, can you imagine there's such a thing as a magnet for water? Hypothesize for a second. You had a magnet for water in the middle of that pyramid, you poured water over it, what would happen? He said, well, obviously the water would stick to the sides of the pyramid. I said, okay, now a sphere. And we're there, because once you accept that gravity is the magnet for water, effectively. And he said, oh, I've never thought about that before. And I thought, oh, I've got a lovely little moment of insight with him. So that was nice. But it's a shame because I thought of an even better way of demonstrating that water can definitely bend around, water can bend when under the right kind of pressures. And you can do it using one of their favorite tools, one of their favorite apparatus. You can do it using a spirit level. The best way to demonstrate water bending with a spirit level, right, is you take your spirit level and you look at it, because if you look carefully, you'll see water bending when it's under pressure. It's exactly the same kind of thing. When the pressures are right, things will behave in a slightly different way, and this is kind of the thing that we're sort of seeing. They say it about architects. Architects never say that they factor the spherical nature of the Earth into their construction. That's not actually true. There's the bridge, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in New York. The Smithsonian magazine explains that when the architects made it, because it was going to be across the curvature of the Earth, if they'd have had it directly parallel to each other, it would in effect have been slightly pointing inwards because it had been around. You had to sort of make it slightly differently, make it slightly pointing in to bend it around. Sorry, the other way around. But yeah, you had to sort of build them so it was nearer at the top than the bottom, so the curvature of the Earth would accommodate for it. So actually, architects do factor this stuff in. Obviously, the airborne objects thing, they say the cannonballs, the planes, the helicopters. What they're missing here is that air is a thing. Air is not nothing, air is a thing. Air is made up of molecules. Those molecules are also spinning through the friction of the Earth, spinning them for long enough. So the whole of our atmosphere is spinning at the same speed. So when you fire a cannonball, it's affected by the atmosphere spinning at the same speed. If it wasn't, when you stepped outside, you'd be hit with gusts of 1,000 miles an hour, as that you span in the world and the air around you didn't. It's a bit like when you're on the back of a school bus and you throw a rolled up ball of paper at your friend at the front of the bus. If the bus is driving 40 miles an hour, you don't have to whip it 60 miles an hour to overcome the 40 mile an hour of the bus. You're in an enclosed system, and so the whole of the air with you is traveling at that speed. So that's something that they don't fully understand. This is a lovely one, actually. They talk about flight altitudes. This is one of my favorite things that they showed me at the Flat Earth Convention. There was a chap that I was talking to who said, there's this lovely demonstration. Like airplanes, when they fly straight. They don't fly curved, they fly straight. And he said, you can see this video, which is a time lapse of planes flying across the US. And then we cut to the side, you can see the planes take off, and then they fly straight for a while, and then come back down again. He said, you don't see them fly in a parabola. If the world was curved, they would be flying around it. We should see parabolic arcs here and not straight lines. So this demonstrates that the world is actually flat. And I said to him, okay, what is this measuring? He said, well, it's altitude. What is altitude? Distance from the ground. Yes, and if the ground curved and you stayed the same height above that curve, what would this graph look like? I said, I don't know what you mean. I said, okay, well, let's try again. I said, so I'm about 6 foot tall. Can you imagine I had a hat on? That hat is going to be 6 foot from the ground. If you had a little counter that measured how high from the ground that hat is, it's going to be at 6 foot. If I walk up a hill, the hat is getting higher up, but it's still 6 foot from the ground, and your tool would say a straight line. He said, oh, I'd never thought about that before. I thought, yes, we're having one by one. I'll deconvert you guys. One by one, I can do this. But I think it just shows, for me, it's the power of the rhetoric. This video looks impressive when it's put out. It's one of Mark Sargent's videos. It's put out with a very reassuring, very assured voiceover explaining to you what's absolutely true. And if you're not set up to question it, if you have motivated reasoning to just accept it, you're not going to look at what is the patently obvious solution to this, because you don't question the thing you believe in. You question the thing the other guy believes in. So that's what I was trying to do, is trying to get people to address their own claim with the same level of veracity that they'd subject my claim to. And the last thing that came up an awful lot at the conference and surprised me was the world is flat because the Bible tells me so. This goes right back to Johnson. This goes right back to the moment in the 70s rather, that the Flat Earth Society got entangled with evangelical Christianity. It hasn't become disentangled, I don't think. I don't think there was any speaker, there might have been one speaker of the entire weekend who didn't get up and say that the flat earth for them was proof that the world is made by God. This is divine proof. Because the Bible talks about the firmament, therefore must be a firmament. The Bible talks about water above and water below, which is very similar to the idea of the infinite planes, and there's the above and there's the below. So this is all just biblical proof. There was even a group there called the Gospel of Flat Earth. They were a Dutch group who talk about how the flat earth is proof of God. And I think this is something that we sort of miss, because we assume people are coming to this on evidence, and that we don't assume that flat earth could be a religious belief. But when I talked to Darren Nesbitt on Be Reasonable, he said, I was an atheist, I was a bit new agey, but I was an atheist. And when people came to me and preached fire and brimstone, it was never going to convert me. I had no interest in that. So I thought, what God does talk about, he said, is that it'll come to you in a big revelation, a big moment of revelation that'll change your life. And I thought, that's what the flat earth is. That's how God is reaching me. The moment of revelation was me realizing the world was flat. And therefore, because I've had that moment of revelation, God must exist as well. So I think it's interesting that these things are so heavily tied that we wouldn't otherwise have known. So what have I learned from all of this, other than having a bloody good weekend in a convention center in Birmingham? First of all, I don't think this is about the science. We can tackle this on the science, but I don't think this is about the science. These people aren't lacking science. They're not disinterested in science. Some are even actually genuinely trying to do scientific method and doing a fairly good job of it, but with some motivated reasoning that leaves it flawed. There also isn't one flat earth belief. So yeah, it's not about science, it's about belief, it's about rhetoric, it's about their ability to counter rhetoric and understand what a bad argument is and how to see your way through to bad logic. But yeah, there isn't one flat earth belief, because you've got the circle earth, you've got the infinite plane, the enclosed world, the cosmic egg, and there are almost certainly dozens, countless other models. I'd be surprised if every flat earther didn't have their own version of what the world looked like. And in fact, there were some there who didn't care what the world was like. They said, all I know is the world isn't round. I don't care what it looks like. That's the only thing I care about. And I think that speaks to something that's behind a lot of this, is that rejection of your idea puts me in this group with other people. And as long as I reject the mainstream, as long as I reject the authority, reject what they want me to think, I don't have to think anything else. I can have my own, I can be in this tribe, in this community. So also, flat earth isn't one belief. It's a cluster of beliefs, because there wasn't one flat earther I spoke to there who wasn't also a conspiracy theorist, who wouldn't say that the moon landing was fake, who wouldn't say that 9/11 was an inside job, but there were people talking about satanic paranoia, the Illuminati, that NASA, their astronauts are all Satanists, because if you ever see footage of astronauts, they quite often do this, and that's their way of admitting that they're Satanists, rather than just the fact that it's a bit rock and roll to be in space. But also, anti-Semitism came up. Someone shared the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a very well-known anti-Semitic hoax. They shared that as proof that the they is out there trying to control you, and you should fight back against that. Chemtrails came up, alternative medicine, anti-vaccination came up. This isn't one belief, it's a cluster of belief, it's a nexus of conspiracy theory, and I think flat earth isn't necessarily the thing that unites them, but the conspiracy theory is the thing that unites flat earthers. It's all about rejecting mainstream thought, I think. I think that's the main thing, is that I see myself as a rejection of authority. And finally, I'd say people come in for lots of reasons, some of them traumatic, as you saw with people who said that they've had major life traumas. But the one thing I would say is mockery of these people helps a lot less if what we want to try and do is help people. I think mockery helps less than understanding. If you really want to reach these people, we should spend the time understanding what it is they believe, how they believe it, what values they have, what led them to that place, and then maybe we can understand how to show them a different way and have them question themselves. Thank you.